Thank y'all. Thank y'all for being here. And it's a full house. That's awesome. And this is really where I want to be, on stage at the Books Fest here with two amazing. You can't hear me? Is that what you said? How's this? All right. Hey, it's great to be here. A great crowd. All right, good deal. Yeah, I'm where I want to be here with two amazing authors who have chosen to set their debut novels, their first novels, debut novels right here in Louisiana. And we're gonna find out why they did it and why they chose that setting and how it has informed their work. So let's meet them. They were introduced, but let me tell you more about them. First, Joselyn Takacs. Her fiction has appeared in Gulf Coast Magazine, Narrative, Tin House, Harvard Review, and other leading literary journals. She has published interviews and book reviews in the Los Angeles Review of Books and has taught writing at the University of Southern California and Johns Hopkins University. She holds a PhD in creative writing and literature from USC and an MFA in fiction from Johns Hopkins University. Her debut novel, here it is, Pierce Oysters. It's a family drama set against the backdrop of the 2010 BP oil spill. Joselyn, welcome. Yeah. And Dr. David Weill, he is the former director of the Center for Advanced Lung Diseases and Lung and Heart-Lung Transplant Program at Stanford University Medical Center. He now provides assistance to transplant programs across the country on how to improve care. His writing has appeared in the Wall Street Journal, USA Today, Newsweek, The Washington Post, Los Angeles Times, and others. He also has authored a memoir, and his debut novel, All That Really Matters, tells the story of an arrogant, blindly ambitious transplant surgeon and what turns out to be his ultimate quest and his journey towards finding out his purpose in life, finding out all that really matters. So welcome, David.
The protagonist isn't me, okay? Let's
yeah, right, that's the first thing. First question off the bat, are you blindly ambitious and arrogant? No, all right.
Depends on who you are.
What about you, Joselyn? How do you feel about that? No, so, but two different novels, both a common setting. Let's find out why. Joselyn, obviously BP oil spill affected Louisiana, but affected other states. Why did you choose Louisiana as your setting?
Well, I chose Louisiana because I was living here at the time of the spill in 2010. And at that time, I was not a writer. I was out of college, and I was waiting tables in the French Quarter, actually.
That's a track a lot of us take, by the way.
At a restaurant I would not recommend.
Our name.
Our name. And I read an interview then with a Louisiana oyster farmer who was shutting down his business as fishing was being shut down, as oil sort of encroached on the inland bays. And I knew nothing then about the BP, about the scope of how these farmers were going to be affected, but also sort of the long history of oyster farming in Louisiana. Many oyster farmers have been in the business for multiple generations, 80, 90 years, some of them. And I just became fascinated with the industry, and over the years, I kept track of how the industry was affected, following the news of a collapse in the industry. And that was the genesis of the novel.
Right.
And why Louisiana.
Why Louisiana, right. And David, your main character grew up very close to where we're sitting and on St. Charles Avenue. Tell us about the setting and your
Yeah, so my main character...
Who is not David.
Who's not David. he was the only son, the only child of the Tulane University president.
Who is not our current or past university president.
Right, right. I mean, a lot of disclosures come with this book. So I actually walk by his house almost every day, and I always looked up at it and said, well, that would be cool. And so the protagonist, his dad was a Nobel Prize laureate, president of Tulane University, had a lot of expectations for this young man. And I wanted to actually, as a debut novelist, write about something that I knew really well, stay on some safe ground. It'd be very difficult for me to set a book in Montana,
right.
Especially as a debut novelist. And I frankly had a lot of fun doing it because I could actually go in and out of things that I knew about New Orleans. And then when the book kind of shifted to the Bay Area, that's a place I spent a lot of time. I could do the same thing there. So in a lot of ways, it was easier.
Right, right. And y'all both kind of touched on it, and how you, because Joselyn, it's Louisiana, but it's a fictitious town. Mm-hmm. So it sounds like it was sort of a combination of research you did, and then David, personal experience, some research or in the setting and getting the town right. Did you do? No, I'm sorry, David. Did you do much research, or was it?
No, I didn't.
No, he didn't.
I mean, fortunately, I've been all over.
Yeah, right. Well, I tell you, you have been in the president's house because I have been, and you describe it quite well.
I have definitely been in the private.
On the third floor.
I can neither confirm nor deny. Yeah, no. So I'd been in there in high school, actually.
Yeah.
A classmate of mine was the daughter of the university president.
Yeah, yeah. All right, you said enough, Dave.
And we were friends. And so, I think it just gave me a chance to not have to do a lot of research, right, and basically say, look, these are the things that I've seen and I know about, right, in this area, and I can do this. Right.
And Joselyn, I guess yours was research, but yet personal. It's not like you were at a library. You were more like on the ground. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's set in a fictionalized town, Golden Vale. It takes place in Lafourche Parish.
Right.
But when you come up with a fictional town, it gives you certain liberties that you can take as an author. So like because people are very understandably and for good reason protective over portrayals of Louisiana. Mm-hmm. And so, if you put the post office on the wrong street, somebody's going to come up to you and tell you that you got it wrong.
Right.
And it's their right.
Venial sin. Yeah, that's right.
So that's why I wanted to fictionalize. And I did a lot of research and got a grant to do an oral history project to record the stories of oyster farmers in 3 parishes of Louisiana. And I wanted to steal from multiple stories, and having a fictionalized setting makes that easier.
You talk about wanting to get it right, and people being, will call you to task. You felt that pressure sort of and David, I mean, I guess you had less, but even being from here, did you feel a little tension on like, okay, I want to make sure I got it right?
My biggest obstacle, I think, in writing about New Orleans, and I'll do it again at some point, was not to cliche it.
Yeah.
I think that's a challenge, because we've all seen, movies that are quote unquote set here, right, and we've seen books, and we've seen the silly accents that people use and all that kind of stuff. Right. And I think there is a tendency to caricature New Orleans, mm-hmm, and I wanted to try to avoid that if I could.
Yeah. Same thing, Joselyn. I mean, you felt the pressure, you said, but.
Oh, a tremendous pressure.
Right,
because, I was in grad school, so I wasn't living here because I was a student elsewhere. And then I was writing about an industry that I didn't grow up in.
It was sort of a double, yeah.
Yeah. So at times that's kind of paralyzing.
Yeah, well,
it did take me 8 years to finish this book.
Right.
So.
Right. Well, you both pulled it off, and they're wonderful books, and you've both gotten wonderful reviews. You want to check them out later, but is there a particular review that you felt that you're particularly proud of, Joselyn, or that, they got it right? This person really, yeah.
You know, when you finish a book and you send it out for blurbs, I don't know how many of you are familiar with this process, but it's a frightening prospect. You know, you send your book to the writers that you most admire, and you hope that they'll read it, and you hope that they'll say something nice. I studied with Alice McDermott, and am a huge fan of her work. And so I got a very nice blurb from her about the book. But the review that mattered most to me was The Advocate, the Times Picayune review. I really wanted it to connect with the reviewer, and I was lucky.
Right, so you felt that was like the endorsement of, hey,
Right.
you gotten it right.
Uh-huh.
All right, that's great. Now, what about you, David?
Yeah, I mean, the reviews that I like to hear, you know, I finished it in 2 sittings. It was
Yeah.
easy to turn the page. It seemed lifelike. It made me care about the characters. But my favorite review was actually a really crappy one. And they kind of said, well, he writes about transplantation in a fictional setting, but he obviously doesn't know anything about it.
That's awesome.
And I was like, I guess not. So I saved.
You should have consulted with a doctor, what do you know?
Yeah, I actually cut and pasted that and put it on my computer.
That's a classic, yeah, that's great. Well, you know, you mentioned about how many people have been through the process. I mean, I think we have a lot of writers amongst us. What is some of the advice you'd give to someone who's, you know, writing and just trying to get something published?
I mean, I think you have to find your people. Writers are often, I call many writers my friends, and they're often very self-critical people. And so you need to find people who are going to lift you up when you're putting yourself down. And then I think it's important to set smaller goals for yourself than you can actually accomplish, so you're ensure that you're actually making progress. In my case, it was a word count goal that I could easily meet.
A daily sort of, yeah.
Yeah, 5 days, not daily. I'm not crazy.
Yeah.
Daily. 5 days a week.
Right. What about you, David? What sort of, because you wrote a memoir first, and interestingly, did you find that easier than writing a novel, or, you know?
I found it more emotionally difficult.
Yeah.
I found writing a novel a lot more fun.
Oh, it's interesting, yeah.
I really did. And my 3rd book that's coming out in the fall is back to nonfiction. I'll probably go back and forth.
It's nonfiction, okay, yeah.
I think the most important advice that I would give a writer is, whatever you're going to write about, just recognize that you're going to spend a couple or 3 years or 8 years with it.
Yeah.
So you really have to care intensely about the subject matter,
Right.
and you know, you have to sit with it constantly. And I think that that's most important. I mean, you know, there's the writing part that has all its intricacies, and then there's the publishing part, and these are 2 fairly different processes.
Mm-hmm.
I love one and not as much the other.
Right.
And I think that young writers or people just starting out think that it's all about just write, you know, and then it shows up on a bookshelf somewhere.
Right.
Not exactly. And I think the key, though, is to really care what you're going to write about for a few years. I mean, I think that's really key.
Right. You mentioned people, of course, wanting you to get the city and the state right. What is it, you know, because, and David, you mentioned so many times New Orleans, Louisiana has been depicted with everything from a Texas accent to strange, you know, people in New Orleans speaking French, and not that no one does, but obviously a little transposed. But what is it that's so special about us that is setting?
I think
no, me particular. What's so special about it?
I haven't found anything so far.
Well, it's early.
You know, I think it's the same reason that people love living here. I mean, you know, my father used to say, you know, people asked him how he liked living here, and he said, well, yeah, I like it. It's near America.
Yeah, right.
And I think that, many of us, I went off for 27 years and moved back, and that, that's a very typical story. A lot of
It
people.
has a hold.
Yeah, and I think that that not only makes living here very rich, but it makes for rich characters on the page, because there's a lot of, as Dr. John used to say, characters here.
Yeah.
So.
What about you, Jocelyn? Are you going to come back?
I keep trying. I married a man from Portland, Oregon, so that's where I live now. But we'll be back.
Yeah.
We last lived here during the pandemic.
That was a different time.
It was a different time, but it worked out for us because there were a lot of uninhabited Airbnbs during the pandemic, as tourists were not allowed to come to the city. And I was teaching remotely, he was teaching remotely, and there's no place we'd rather be. So we came here.
Yeah. Is any of your short fiction set in Louisiana, or is it, Gulf, yeah.
Actually,
Gulf Coast,
maybe some of the awful early unpublished stuff is set in New
Well, that's what we
Orleans.
wanted to know about.
I took a fiction workshop at UNO while I lived here before I started graduate school. So
Right.
there was some early work set here.
More set here, yeah. What are some of the, and I like to answer it because I read up on y'all a little bit, but what are some of your favorite authors who either lived here and wrote here or lived elsewhere and wrote about the state and city?
Probably my all-time favorite was somebody I started reading in high school, Walker Percy.
Right.
I think that it was interesting. He was a physician as well, but never practiced.
Right.
Psychiatry residency and then didn't practice, which I totally understand. I think that what I liked a lot about his writing is he took, it was more than New Orleans, it was kind of South Louisiana.
Yeah.
And I think that his sensory detail and the way that he was able to describe what does it feel like to be here was extraordinary. And so I think of all the writers from this area, I think he would be number one for me.
Yeah, and you have an epigraph in your book from Last Gentleman, yeah.
Yeah.
What about you, Jocelyn?
We have that in common. I was going to say The Moviegoer.
Yeah.
I knew it.
I love that. I love that novel. But I also really like the short stories of, Truman Capote has some short stories set here. Tennessee Williams has short stories set here in addition to the plays we all know. And actually another collection that came out a few years ago, Sorry for Your Trouble by Richard Ford, has some stories set here. And it's no surprise that it inspires writers sort of generation after generation.
And you're a Steinbeck fan, right?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, and of course, he wrote about New Orleans in Travels with Charlie, right?
Yes, yeah.
So, no, it's amazing how many y'all are going down the list and how many writers are even from here have written about us. So it's we kind of punch above our weight, I think, and as far as a population, I mean, we're not New York or Los Angeles, but you get that attention. What about your structure? How do you? I know you must get this. You're asked this a lot. How do you find time to write? When do you write? What's the? Do you do an outline? Do you do a first draft? What about you, David?
That just reminded me. A couple years ago, I had a student from Tulane saying that they were interested in writing and they wanted to do an internship with me.
Oh, no.
And I said, you're going to be gravely disappointed. It's sit down for 15 minutes, walk around the house, sit down for 15, order something on Amazon, go answer the FedEx guy. You're going to be very disappointed. Anyway, my process really is with 3x5 note cards. So when I start to actually work on a project, I basically take a big bulletin board, 3x5 note cards, and each note card is a scene. And I try to get 50 or 60 of those note cards up there.
Yeah.
And then I start rearranging them. I did not invent that. I'm sure many, many writers have done that, but that works best for me. I'm kind of visual.
I find that fascinating. I knew as a physician that you'd have some process that wasn't. Yeah. What about you, Jocelyn?
I rely heavily on an internet blocker. A program called Freedom in particular I use. It's got a time limit. You can't access any of the apps on your phone or your computer for that whole stretch of time. And because I did so much research, I found that it was hard for me sometimes not to get lost in the weeds. So I did a lot of free writes. And the first draft of this novel was really...
Free writes where you just sort of sit down and start writing, or?
Sit down, start writing,
Yeah.
you know, for an hour at a time. And then the novel came out of the accumulation of a lot of those sessions where I had to work backwards and find the plot, because I'm just not very gifted at thinking of plot ahead of time.
Yeah, yeah. And could either of you imagine doing it, writing differently? Like, David, throw away your cards and don't do that? Or you start writing down in index cards?
I'm actually just finishing a screenplay, which is very plot focused.
Yeah.
And so I haven't used note cards, but I have had to change my methods a bit.
'Cause, yeah, it's more structured. Yeah.
Because it's more structured, yeah.
Right. David, could you imagine not having your cards and just start writing? Or?
No, I'm addicted to my cards.
Right.
No, I don't, you know, for me, it's very, I kind of have to know where it's going, I mean,
Yeah.
for me. And so the note cards are great because one of the thousands of times I get up from my chair during the day, I can go over there and look at the board. And also, you know, I'm not alone as a writer in this. Stuff occurs to me at odd times.
Yeah.
And so if I have a note card handy, I just write it on the note card, and then there it is. So
Right.
that works for me.
Well, having attended a lot of panels like this, I mean, it seems like the answer to that question is how to write it depends on the person. And I don't think anyone should force themselves, just like you shouldn't throw your cards away. Someone shouldn't force themselves to do, oh, this is going to work because I have index cards now. You know, you have to find your own method. Yeah. And what about the time? The time of day you write and how much time you write in one sitting? Joselyn, do you have a structured?
It was so nice to be a graduate student, just sort of teaching, and,
Right,
and
that's what
I,
you are
I
now.
had most of my day was free to squander. But now I work full time, and so I've got to squirrel away morning hours. I have to get up earlier to get the writing done. And I write on weekends
Yeah.
as well.
Do you have a set time? Hey, I'm going to write 2 hours, 3 hours, or
I like to have a couple of hours,
Yeah.
ideally in the morning anyway, when it feels like my brain is at peak performance.
yeah, right.
But
Yeah, I literally can write in the afternoon. It just,
Well,
doesn't-
that's
I can't, you know, write, you know, the cat ran up the tree in the
Yeah.
afternoon. So I get up in the morning and write, you know, straight away, and then stop at lunch.
Okay.
And then in the afternoon, I do my consulting work. So the first half of the day is devoted to writing, and the second half to commerce.
Oh, interesting. Right. You start consulting people after you're kind of brain dead.
Yeah, they're-
Yeah, that's a good idea.
Actually, if
Good
you
model, Dave.
if you knew transplantation, you would think that that's the best way to do it.
Yeah, right. All right, and I know this is a question you get all the time, but you have to answer it. How much of your work, even though, you know, you're not an oyster farmer, but how much of it was autobiographical or of people you know? I mean, how much of your experiences do you bring into your work?
well, in this novel, there's a character who's living in New Orleans, and he is sort of the younger brother in this oyster farming family. He's a bohemian, he's a musician, and he's also living off of the family business, which isn't my experience, but he was a part of an activist community, and they protest the use of the chemical dispersant that BP used to break up the oil during the oil spill, and those sections of the book are taken from my experience, although the protests in the novel are far more successful than the ones that I took part in.
Oh, and what about you, David? You obviously, I mean, the character's a surgeon, and
Yeah, I mean, I I think there were certain parallels and silhouettes of, you know, my life and all that kind of stuff, but I'm a much better guy than that.
I would think so.
I think what's interesting is the characters I saw working in this field, which attracted characters, they all show up in my book. I mean, you know, they're either individually showing up or combinations of
Yeah,
people.
you'll never have a transplant if that's what you're reading this.
Right, and I think,
No, I'm good.
you know, and while it's all been fictionalized, it's not science fiction.
Right.
And, you know, that stuff happens in the hospital.
Yeah.
So I felt like I knew that material well, too.
Interesting, very interesting. Here's a question. What's harder, transplant surgery or writing?
Well, I think that I sleep better when I'm writing. So, there was a lot of night work involved, so I think it's actually easier to write.
Right. And Jocelyn, because you have a challenging job, you're teaching, right?
I'm not currently teaching. I'm working in marketing right now.
Oh, okay, marketing. What's harder?
Writing.
Writing.
Writing is harder.
Yeah. But more rewarding?
More rewarding. I mean, there are a bunch of writers in this room. You pull your hair out. You doubt that you're ever going to have a good idea again. That's hard, but it's also an obsession that's very rewarding when you have a good day.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. David, you talked about your next project. You want to talk more about it?
Yeah, since I tackled some easy issues like professional burnout, drug addiction, love, I figured I'd write about religious identity.
Oh, all
Since-
right.
since
That's something light. Yeah,
light
that's a
and
good
airy.
idea.
So my third book is going to come out in the fall, and it's going to be about, it's memoir again.
Okay.
I'm up to 2 memoirs. 3, you have a problem.
Right.
So I'm going to write about my views and struggles with religious identity.
All right. Jocelyn?
Well, and Pierce Oysters is, had to be a tragedy. It's an environmental disaster story. And so I thought I'd do a palate cleanser and write a comedic screenplay. So I've tried.
That's what you currently.
That's what I'm currently working on. Yeah.
Now, are you commissioned to do that, or are you going to shop it around, or?
I've got an agent. I've got
All
a
right,
film
that's
agent.
nice.
So
Yeah.
we'll see.
Wow, that's gonna. So you've done short fiction and now a novel, obviously, and now a screenplay. Wow. Dave, have you ever thought about screenplay or any?
I'm still working on just writing.
Right. Getting your cards together.
No,
Yeah.
I really haven't.
And your short fiction, you've tended to do long form, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, Jocelyn, a lot of people think, oh, well, start off with a short story, it's easier, but that's not necessarily true, huh?
Oh, I love the short story form, but it's apples and oranges.
Yeah.
There's a kind of perfectibility to the short story where it feels contained. It's like you're building a little machine. And particularly if you read a lot of short stories, you kind of get a sense for how the rise and fall of them should feel, even though I don't think it's formulaic.
Yeah.
And a novel's just messier. I think you can get lost, particularly in the middle, and have a difficulty finding your way to some place that surprises you. Because I think the writing is most rewarding when I feel surprised.
Do you have a preference? Do you prefer one over the other, or just?
I love the short story. I love the short story form. Publishers don't really like to buy my short story collections, unfortunately.
But you've had, a lot of success getting the publishing.
I've had some success, placing stories, but I think my agent would be pretty sad if I came back to her and was like, "Can we do a collection?"
A collection, yeah. Even of published ones, it will be, yeah.
Yeah,
Huh.
Yeah. They're hard.
Yeah.
It's a tough market.
Yeah.
It's a tough market.
Yeah.
Writers read short stories.
Yeah. Right. And how hard, David, was it? And I want to hear from both of y'all to break in, to actually get that first. Well, in your case, it was a memoir. published. You had obviously your work with the Washington Post, and those were those news reports or
I think the op-eds and essays that
Yeah,
I wrote
yeah.
helped,
yeah.
kind of break in from, medical writing to a more general public kind of
Yeah.
writing. I think, with my first book, I think I emailed 40 or 50 agents, and exactly one picked me up.
Yeah. And you went the agent route rather than
I
just
did.
Yeah, yeah.
And then that agent sold the book, but
Yeah.
literally one.
Yeah.
And then a little easier the second time,
Right.
once the
Right.
first one was published. But, it's really hard. There's so many different routes to get published now, but if you want to do it traditionally, agent, publishing house, advance, the whole bit,
Yeah.
it's hard. It's
Yeah.
hard.
Jaselyn, you were fairly young when when you started with your short fiction. But how was it just breaking in, trying to get?
So hard to break
Yeah,
in.
yeah.
I was querying agents during the pandemic, and I think it was querying is dismally slow process because you submit in batches and then you wait to hear back this doesn't meet my needs email, and it was even longer. So it took a year. The book submission process is quicker, mercifully.
Did either of you ever think about, I'm not going to do this? You're a successful doctor. You're a marketing person. This isn't for me. No.
No, I really didn't. I thought that it was eventually going to happen. I think it's a lot like, it was kind of reminding me a lot of medical training, where you're in medical school and you're doing your residency and you kind of suck,
Yeah.
and then you get better and better,
Uh-huh.
and you build on, what you've already done. And it reminded me a lot of that, and I tried to remind myself that, I published my first book when I was 52.
Yeah.
And I had to remind myself that, look, there's people that do this professionally, and I've had this other career, and I have to be patient,
Right.
with it, and just keep at it.
Yeah. Yeah. Jaselyn, did you ever?
I was in far too deep. It was, I could have turned back after, because I had spent 6-7 years getting a PhD in creative writing. So there was a moment when it was pretty hard when I was querying, and I thought, maybe this book just isn't going to be the start of my career. But I still didn't think maybe I'll stop writing.
Yeah.
The thought was maybe I'll write another book.
Is there advice that you give to your when you were teaching that you gave to your students about it's the long game,
Yeah.
Because young people are thinking, yeah, they're gonna 52. What? That's crazy. Who lives that long? That's what they think.
It was in question for a long time. Yeah.
I think, as you say, it's absolutely a long game, but if you are persistent, it's still possible. I think it's particularly hard because everybody knows somebody for whom it was very easy.
Yeah, right.
Somebody who, placed a story and then they immediately got like a 2-book deal. And then you compare yourself against that person. And, it's just a trap.
Yeah.
It's a trap. It helps. I'm also married to another writer, so.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
Mhm.
That's a good dynamic. Yeah. Y'all have gotten great reviews from authors, from media. Have any ordinary Louisianians come up to you and said, either, hey, you had one, you don't know anything about surgery, apparently, but have you ever gotten someone, hey, thanks for depicting us as you have, or thank you?
I think it's interesting because I think people from New Orleans like reading books set in New Orleans, because it's like, yeah, I know that place, and if I talk about going to Fat Harry's, they're like, yeah, I go to Fat Harry's, and I think there's that certain familiarity. So, and I understand that. I like it too when I read.
Yeah, yeah.
You know, I've gotten some hits about things that a few things I got wrong. Somebody said, you know, we don't have nobody's got sprinklers in my neighborhood.
Wait, what was it?
Nobody's got sprinklers in my neighborhood.
Oh, wow.
And
Boy, they're boring in on you, huh?
but
How dare you?
but that said, you know, it was a fictionalized town, but
Yeah.
I had a couple of women come up to me at a reading last summer who are from Golden Meadow, who grew up
Yeah,
in Golden
right.
Meadow, and said that they really resonated with the setting.
Oh, that's nice.
So that felt like that's a success in my book.
Right. Now, what about industry criticism? I mean, David, has anybody from the medical field said, what are you doing, man?
Well, when my first book came out, there was some of that, like, don't tell them all that. And then when my second book came out and it was fictionalized and it went a little further, they said, really don't tell them that.
Right.
And so it's mostly, though, been well
That's
received.
just for the physician desk referral. Don't put it, yeah.
What one gratifying thing is that people in our field who've read the book have, either of my books, have actually turned it over to their family members, and now their family members kind of get it a little bit better, you know.
Yeah.
because
Oh, understand.
I kind of,
Right. Yeah.
yeah, I described the life, you know, and so when their spouse is crazy, they kind of know why.
Right. Did you get any industry, well, you were a protester, right? And it's like,
You know, I thought, you know, maybe someone from the oyster industry will take issue, and I
Yeah.
haven't heard from anyone. There was a gentleman who came to a book group meeting, and he worked for Halliburton, which produced the cement, which failed in the BP disaster. And I thought, like, here's my moment. I'm gonna be excoriated. But he was very lovely and claimed to have enjoyed the book, so I dodged a bullet.
Yeah. Of course, if people really came out and protest your book, that's truly what you want. I mean, right? And all that's
Go viral.
I mean, ban it, man. That's what you're looking for, ultimately. That's why we write, honestly. Yeah, so I know we have just a few more minutes. I don't think we can take, we're not equipped to take questions from the audience, and I apologize for that. If someone wants to yell something out, we can go ahead and do it. Yeah, is there anything I haven't asked y'all want to talk about? The LSU, the bracket or anything? Anything?
No, I mean, I think that covers it, but maybe somebody can stand up and ask a question.
Yeah, someone can ask
We can
something.
hear you.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah, we can hear
Thank
you.
Did you use beta readers, especially when you were first starting your first book, like family or friends or colleagues or someone, as you were going along, or maybe did you wait till the end and had a manuscript? What did you show for putting it out there, looking for an agent?
Do you want Joselyn to answer that or me?
Either one.
Do you want me to go?
You go.
Yeah, I did. There's, in the acknowledgement section of both of my book, there's 4 or 5 people that look at my books, you know, the so-called vomit draft. So,
It's a medical term.
and I'm, you know, and I think that's valuable. I really do. And I think it's been a different group of people for each of the 2 books I've published, and I haven't let anybody read this 3rd one yet, so.
I mean, because I'm married to a writer, I've got a live-in editor, so he reads. God bless him.
Yeah.
If I feel like I've had a really good day and I'm on fire, he reads that too. But he read the first draft and really all of the drafts. But I have writer friends, and I picked a couple. I think you're always going to get people who can, till the end of time, tell you what you need to change in your novel. So I think you don't want sort of a resounding, this is ready for publication you don't need to wait for that before you are submitting your work, because that could never come.
That has to be the ultimate test of a marriage, though. honey, tell me what you think about my book I've been working on for 9 years.
Yeah, yeah.
No pressure.
Does this shirt make me look?
Right, exactly. Yes.
I was wondering how the editing process went from when you first sent it off to what you had to go through and how much had to be changed.
So in both of my books, and this third one as well, I've worked with the same editor in New York, and she's very good and very harsh. And she doesn't really change what I want to do. She more, cuts it, looks for repetition. She's a caricature of somebody from New York, and she'll write at the top, "This is awful." Or boring and repetitious. So I think, though, that you need that. I really do. Because, the last thing you want in an editor is just fluff, they've got to tell you. And I respond well to that, probably due to my medical training. So I think that it's critical. I don't have so much like, there was 7 drafts of it. It's more edited in chunks. So you're kind of constantly going through the whole thing, if that makes sense.
Yes. Or did you, Jocelyn, did you want to answer? Or, because your husband is your editor. So
Yeah.
he better not write boring.
He'd better not.
No,
He'd better
no.
not. If he wants me to cook great dinner.
That's right. Dinner would be one thing, yeah. Yes, sir.
I have a question about when to approach an agent, when the draft is finished, or when it's near finished, or at what point do you sort of reach out to people?
You really wait until it's finished. I think agents now kind of take on more of an editorial role than they have in the past. But if you want someone to get excited about it, they have to think that it's pretty close to submission, even if they're going to say, this storyline needs tweaking. So I would wait, until you feel like it's as good as you can get it. Which contradicts what I said earlier. Don't wait until everybody thinks that it's done.
And David, you went right away. Well, both of y'all went the agent route.
Yeah, I had for the nonfiction book I did first, I had a proposal ready to go for all the agents, so I felt like I at least had to have that.
Yeah, right. Now, I know y'all want, we're getting close to the end here of time, but both of these authors will be signing their books, and I'm going to get my copies signed on the Berger family lawn, just outside the downstairs and outside. And if you want to talk to them, and I know you do, we have to clear out this room because they're going to come, and it's going to be like a big AV production. ZZ Top is coming. I don't know what it is, but it's fireworks. But thank y'all very much, and I don't think and give a big hand for David Weill and Joselyn Takacs. Thank y'all very much.